During the Battle of Dunkirk from May 26 to June 4, 1940, some 338,000 British Expeditionary Force (BEF) and other Allied troops were evacuated from Dunkirk to England as German forces closed in on them. The massive operation, involving hundreds of naval and civilian vessels, became known as the Miracle of Dunkirk and served as a turning point for the Allied war effort. Battle of Dunkirk. The so-called phony war was over on May 10, 1940, when Nazi Germany invaded Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. What had appeared to be solid Allied lines of defense had been breached without opposition by the sheer speed and violence of the German blitzkrieg, German for lightning war, tactics. In the face of such a highly mobile ground forces supported by panzer tanks along with superior air power and a coordinated strategy, all three countries would succumb quickly. The Allies, instead of looking across the front line to face the enemy, had been shocked to discover German tanks behind them. Confusion reigned among the BEF and French armies, and the enemy was closing fast around Dunkirk. General John Gort and his commanders from the British Expeditionary Force (BEF) had no choice but to remove his men by sea. Previously laid plans for a mass evacuation were already underway, and Gort was already making a tactical withdrawal to the site which offered the best long, open beaches at the closest point of England. Evacuation of Dunkirk. The evacuation of June 1940 was one of the most famous withdrawals in history, that of Allied, principally British, troops from northern France, more particularly Dunkirk. Aside from the bravery and fortitude of the many involved, both those who waited exposed to the threat of German air attack before being evacuated to England, and those who rescued them, this withdrawal depended upon key British local advantages, including naval superiority and a nearby base to which to retreat. The British had not been prepared for a fighting retreat in the face of an active and unexpectedly mobile opponent. Transport, fuel, and communications all proved insufficient. In the end, simply getting the army out of France became paramount. Having exploited the strategic and operational deficiencies of the Allies, notably the French, the Germans had crossed the River Meuse at Dinant and Sedan on May 3 and reached the English Channel near Abbeville on May 21, then had widened their position to the north. They took the port of Boulogne on May 23 and besieged another, Calais. Calais held out until May 27, while Lille, defended ably by the 1st French Army, did not surrender until June 1. Both provided important distractions for the Germans closing in on the encircled Allied forces around Dunkirk. The British were able to evacuate 338,000 troops, mostly British but also French, but not their equipment, from May 26 to June 3. This owed much to skill, bravery, luck, but also a lot to a German halt on May 24, which owed much to Luftwaffe, German Air Force, pressure to take a leading role, to the need of German tanks for maintenance, to the necessity of allowing the exhausted German tank crews time to recover, and to Hitler's determination to conserve his forces in order to attack French units near Paris. The ability of the outnumbered Royal Air Force, which lost 177 aircraft, to go on resisting Luftwaffe attacks was important. The weather was also a key element as the Channel was unusually calm. The Allied withdrawal, a combined operation, in reverse, helped distract attention from the striking failure of the land campaign. Other Allied units were evacuated by sea from French ports further west, including Saint-Valery and Cox, Le Havre, Cherbourg, Saint-Malo, Brest and Saint-Nazaire, although many troops were captured, including at Dunkirk. By the time the evacuations ended, some 198,000 British and 140,000 French troops would manage to get off the beaches at Dunkirk, a total of some 338,000 men. An additional 90,000 Allied forces were left behind, along with the bulk of the British Expeditionary Force's heavy guns and tanks, when the resistance ended on the morning of June 4 and German troops occupied Dunkirk. Miracle weather. Operation Dynamo, as it was known, saw 20 ships of the British Navy joined by 850 little ships, privately owned boats, to make multiple trips across the Channel between the 26th of May and the 4th of June. The waters of the Channel are notoriously treacherous, which could have posed problems for the smaller boats, but thanks to a spell of settled weather, the sea remained unusually calm with little more than a light breeze. Light easterly winds blew smoke over the beaches, screening the soldiers as they waited to be evacuated. Cloud cover between 28th and the 30th of May obscured the beaches, preventing the Luftwaffe from bombing the Allied forces and their rescuers as they sailed across the Channel. Above the clouds, the Royal Air Force was able to engage the Luftwaffe in the skies. In the week of Operation Dynamo, around 338,000 soldiers were rescued. Le Paradis Massacre. The 2nd Battalion of the Royal Norfolk Regiment was among those ordered to hold back the German advance across France for as long as possible, to enable the evacuation of nearly 340,000 Allied soldiers from the beaches of Dunkirk. They fought with little rest or food for 17 days, alongside men from the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Scots, resisting tank charges and repelling oncoming forces from a farm at Le Paradis in northern France. On May 27, after holding off until their ammunition was spent, 99 soldiers from the Royal Norfolk Regiment retreated to a farmhouse in the village of Paradis, about 50 miles from Dunkirk. Agreeing to surrender, the trapped regiment started to file out of the farmhouse, waving a white flag tied to a bayonet. They were met by German machine gun fire. They tried again, and the British regiment was ordered by an English-speaking German officer to an open field where they were searched and divested of everything from gas masks to cigarettes. They were then marched into a pit where machine guns had been placed in fixed positions. A German officer, Captain Fritz Knockline, gave the order, "Fire." Those Brits who survived the machine gun fire were either stabbed to death with bayonets or shot dead with pistols. Of the 99 members of the regiment, only 2 survived, both privates, Albert Pooley and William O'Callaghan. They lay among the dead until dark. Then, in the middle of a rainstorm, they crawled to a farmhouse, where their wounds were tended. With nowhere else to go, they surrendered again to the Germans, who made them pals. Pooley's leg was so badly wounded he was repatriated to England in April 1943 in exchange for some wounded German soldiers. Upon his return to Britain, Pooley's gruesome story was not believed. Only when O'Callaghan returned home and verified the story was a formal investigation made. After the war, a British military tribunal in Hamburg found Captain Knockline, who gave the fateful order to fire, guilty of a war crime. He was hanged for his offense. Impact of Dunkirk. While the German blitzkrieg was undoubtedly successful, France would call for an armistice by mid-June 1940. The evacuation boosted morale. If the British Expeditionary Force, BEF, had been captured, it would have meant the loss of Britain's only trained troops and the collapse of the Allied cause. The successful evacuation was a great boost to civilian morale and created the Dunkirk spirit, which helped Britain to fight on in the summer of 1940. Germany had hoped defeat at Dunkirk would lead Britain to negotiate a speedy exit from the conflict. Instead, the "Miracle at Dunkirk" became a rallying cry for the duration of the war and an iconic symbol of the British spirit, leaving a cultural legacy of pride and perseverance that endures nearly 8 decades later. In a speech delivered on June 4, 1940, Winston Churchill issued a warning. "We must be very careful not to assign to this deliverance the attributes of a victory." Also issued in the same speech, "Wars are not won by evacuations." However, he delivered a stirring statement of the British resolve that would serve the nation well over the next 5 grueling years of warfare. "We shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. Aftermath of Dunkirk. Despite the successful evacuation at Dunkirk, thousands of French troops were left behind and taken prisoner by the advancing Germans. Also abandoned on the shores of Dunkirk were massive supplies of ammunition, 90,000 rifles, 11,000 machine guns, 880 field guns, 310 large-caliber artillery pieces, 500 anti-aircraft guns, 850 anti-tank guns, 700 tanks, 45,000 cars and lorries, and 20,000 motorcycles, enough equipment to arm nearly 10 divisions of soldiers. It is known that two atrocities took place during the Battle of Dunkirk: the massacre at Paradis and another at Wormhout, carried out by Waffen SS soldiers against British and French troops who had already surrendered. Although the Battle of Dunkirk must ultimately go down tactically as a German victory, the rescue of so many of its men ensured that, like a phoenix, Britain rose from the ashes of defeat to gain a great and lasting victory. With Western Europe abandoned by its main defenders, the German army swept through the rest of France, and Paris fell on June 14. 8 days later, Henri Pétain signed an armistice with the Nazis at Compiègne. Germany annexed half of France, leaving the other half in the hands of their puppet French rulers. It wasn't until June 6, 1944, that the liberation of Western Europe finally began with the successful Allied landing at Normandy.